Yeah, so this is just following the election, which is very, very close. And there are some ridings that are within 100 votes, which does automatically trigger a recount, which is understandable. But he's more or less going to unpack the dynamics behind the election.
Yeah, and this is Stephen Quinn, and he was one of the main commentators on the night of the election too. It was like not even an attempt to be objective, but anyway, we'll listen to the clip. It's about 5 minutes long here.
3 of 4 seats in Richmond. What does that tell you?
Well, Richmond, both Richmond and Surrey, really, when you look at what the Conservative vote represented, it was pretty much, rural BC, but also a lot of ethnic minorities, whether it's Chinese Canadians or Indo-Canadians. And so a lot of those groups came together and said, they had enough, whether it was the drugs and crime problems, whether it was SOGI that's going in our schools. There's a lot of things that were driving people that wanted to see change.
I mean, drugs and crime and SOGI are two ways to scare people, basically.
Well, I wouldn't say that necessarily. But parents are very concerned about their kids. They're concerned about their own safety. And
sure, but is there anything to it? But I don't want to get into it because we do every time. But really, is there anything to fear from SOGI? Really?
Well, when your 6-year-old boy, his grandson, comes home and sitting at the dinner table and saying, "Grandpa, is it okay that I'm a boy?" At 6 years old, should they really be asking those questions?
Why not? Why wouldn't they ask a question?
Well, that's a question I think that the electorate looks at and says, they don't find that acceptable. When you look at also, quite frankly, the pornography that is in our schools.
There is no pornography involved in the SOGI program. There is no pornography in the SOGI program. And I don't want to go through this again because we go through it every time. But let's also talk about the crime and drug factor too, because you're in Richmond warning them against what you are calling drug dens. There are no supervised consumption sites in Richmond.
So first of all, let's actually show the books that are being made available in our schools on your television show, and to see what kind of ratings you get with that.
That are being made available in our schools.
Made available
right,
in
but
our
they're
schools.
Not part of a curriculum.
They came from the SOGI initiative, which is not a curriculum. It is a philosophy that has been brought to schools. But when it comes to what's going on in Richmond, there was housing units that have been put in.
So that's brilliant, because all the times you've seen, and this happens at school board meetings, this has happened in Parliament, this has happened where people take books that are available in schools and they're immediately censored or shut down because it's too inappropriate for whatever form. It's like the school board meeting. It's like, well, you can't say all these, you can't describe that sexual act because that's too graphic. Or
for this meeting of adults.
Or it's unparliamentary language. Yeah. And you're like, well, yeah, if we can't read it in Parliament, why are these books available for like a 10-year-old in these schools?
And there's a perfect microcosm there of it's not happening. It happens sometimes. And then they moved on, but it eventually would have been, it's a good thing that it's happening. There is no pornography in schools. Okay, the pornography is there, but it's not directly part of the SOGI initiatives. Okay, well, it's the SOGI initiatives isn't a program per se, but the books were initially acquired by the philosophy that allowed that program to proliferate through the schools.
And this host, you can see he's argued these things before. I'm not sure specifically with John Rustad or with just other people on CBC, but a good host at that point would ask clarifying questions and would unpack things like, what do you mean by this? Mm. It's like, well,
or what evidence do you have of this?
What evidence or what examples?
Not telling the guests that they're wrong and this is why. When in fact they're not wrong and the host is actually wrong. Infuriating to watch.
So that's just the SOGI part, but we still have the drug element.
Oh yes. This is good.
Where drug consumption is being allowed. There was safe injection sites which were proposed to come into Richmond that we said, no, we will not allow that to happen.
Drug consumption takes place in every neighborhood in this province, in rich neighborhoods and poor neighborhoods. All over this province, people are consuming drugs.
So talk to the families that live in an area where one of these housing units have come in, and ask them about what's happened with the drugs and the crime within their neighborhoods, particularly when it's close to a school or playground. And take a look at these places. So
people should be afraid, then, is what you're saying.
People are afraid when you see the drugs and crime happening in their neighborhood.
Right.
You know, there's random things going on. You seem to think that it is okay for this to be happening everywhere in the province. I do not believe that's true.
I don't believe it's okay either. But what I'm saying is, you know, when people are looking at the issues that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, blowing things out of proportion, taking single incidents that are terrible incidents and trying to turn those into the norm is not necessarily helpful. The evidence shows that overall crime is down. The evidence shows that stranger attacks are down. The evidence shows.
So Stephen, I would challenge you on that. And the reason why I would challenge you on is this. Talk to the police about it. And the problem
police
is,
will tell you the crime is down overall, that stranger attacks are down.
The police will tell you that it's down because they can't lay charges because there's no point. Charges are not going through. So many crimes are going without charges being laid. There's a reason why, for example, Save on Foods has hired 345 security guards around the province. And it's not because... It's not because they suddenly think that they need those jobs. It's because they've got problems. They've got crime. They've got drugs coming. They've got the things, stuff being stolen out of the stores.
Right.
Their staff are not feeling safe. This is what is going on in our communities. Talk to the small businesses.
Could it be because people can't afford to eat?
Talk to the small businesses where things are walking out of their stores on a regular basis and how difficult it is. Look at how many businesses are closed down now. People are not going downtown anymore because they're not feeling safe. This is what is out there in our society today, and it should not be trivialized and become normal.
I'm not trivializing it at all. I'm saying that you see the world in a very particular way, in a way that's a dangerous, awful place. That's it, and I don't know that everybody sees it that way.
Everybody may not see it that way, but I can tell you something. Were there tons of tent cities all over the house 7 years ago? No, all over the city. No, I mean the province. No, there wasn't. Those are popping up. Was there people doing drugs all over the place? No, it was more limited and very serious. Now there's drugs all over. For example, there were 10 cities all over.
There were 10 cities all over Vancouver 20 years ago when they built the Woodwards building. There were 10 cities at Science Row. There were 10 cities in Victoria.
They were not all over the place. No,
well, there have been tent cities around for a very long time.
There have been, but not to the same level. They proliferated all over the communities. I mean, you just drive down the highway, Highway 1, you'll see them here and there and everywhere now. Those were never there 7 years ago.
Well, that last portion just in particular reminded me of the J.D. Vance's reply to that reporter when they were talking about the Venezuelan gangs taking over those apartment complexes in I can't remember what state it was, but where she was like, it's not several apartment complexes or something, and he was like, how many apartment complexes being taken over by Venezuelan gangs is acceptable to you? Like,
yeah,
like sorry,
what level of increase is?
Yeah, like how many, Stephen Quinn, how many tent cities are acceptable? And also before that, did you notice how he told on himself a little bit there? Where, with Save on Foods hiring 345 security guards, is it because do you think people can't afford to eat? Whose job might it be to ensure that people have enough money to afford to eat?
Yeah, it's you think there's some ripple effects from the federal, but also provincial, and who's in power right now in federally in Canada, and so you have Liberals in Canada, and then NDP in power in BC. So he kept on interrupting. I must give credit for John Rustad for just pushing through. Like he was very like
professional, I think.
Yeah, he knew when to like. Some people would chase those answers and they would try to address everything. He pushed through and tried to finish his points, which were interrupted, but his points stood under their own merits. Therefore, like, you don't have to argue every little thing that the host is interrupting, which shouldn't happen.
No, it was so adversarial, and that's just so it's just so typical now, of this type of media environment we're in right now.
The host, I can see that, like, in his mind, he's like, well, I have to correct this misinformation in real time. You can't let misinformation propagate. And here's like, oh, we're being balanced by having somebody from the other side on our program, but we can't let them get away with misinformation. And in that aspect, I think he feels like it's maybe a moral duty to like correct him